Within the scope of my project, public space is where people can gather and share their thoughts and ideas about necessary change in an accessible, safe, and collaborative environment. Waiting to Cast is an installation protest. It celebrates the victories of voting rights while acknowledging the continued struggle for voter suppression. Voting rights have taken 2 centuries, give or take, to be properly established. Therefore, residual issues have been bestowed nationwide in a repetitive, intersectional manner. If we look at an ultra-condensed history of voting rights in the United States, we will see these patterns. In 1789, the Constitution granted states the power to set voting requirements. Across the board, this prioritized property-owning or tax-paying white males, which was only 6% of the population at the time. In 1869, Wyoming, miraculously, is the first state to give women voting rights. In 1870, just a year later, the 15th Amendment prevents states from denying the right to vote on the grounds of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This initiated Jim Crow laws to be created and passed in former Confederate states. The Jim Crow laws essentially disenfranchised African Americans and poor white voters using stipulations such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses. Unfortunately, at this time, the Supreme Court would enable these efforts of discrimination. In 1920, the 19th Amendment is enacted, and this grants women the right to vote in all U.S. states. In 1948, Arizona and New Mexico finally get it together and become the last states to extend full voting rights to Native Americans. In 1971, adults aged 18 through 20 are granted the right to vote, with the argument that soldiers who are old enough to fight for their country should be granted the right to vote. And finally, in 1986, the U.S. military and other citizens living overseas are granted the right to vote by absentee ballot. This timeline, though riddled with injustices, is proof that persistent protest can create defining movements. The 14th Street Union Square subway station is located below the grounds of Union Square, a park with a rich history of protest and intervention. Most notably for this presentation and project, it was largely the site of the first suffragette march of New York City in 1904. Women and men gathered outside of the suffragette headquarters just 1 block west of the square and proceeded to march for the right to vote for women. They marched to and through the square along the diagonal that is Broadway, ending just north at Madison Square. Today, there is a portion of the subway mezzanine that runs just below ground, parallel to Broadway's diagonal, parallel to where hundreds of people marched for a women's right to vote. The intervention of this space does not end with the marches and happenings above ground, though. Our strip of mezzanine hallway has been imposed upon more than once in the last 40 years. An installation by Mary Miss highlights the varying infrastructural changes the subway station endured over its life. An NYPD hub at the far end of the hall can also be seen. And finally, a humble yet heavy cascade of white labels along the white tiled wall bear the names of victims from the September 11th attacks. It is in this space between the red rectangles of Mary Miss's work and the anonymously placed labels that millions of people walk, roll, and run to catch trains or leave the station. We can agree it's an unassuming space. It may feel mundane or predictable because it seems to exist out of necessity. It is a throughway, a long threshold, and it is the history and very usual features that make it the perfect place for disruption. The intervention within this train station is meant to engage the passersby so that anyone who comes across it can decide how much they'll interact with it and for how long. Using methods of craft and materials of the homemaker, this project creates thick, uneven, and partly bulbous columns that hang from the ceiling in a maze-like arrangement around the existing structural steel columns running lengthwise down the center of the hallway. The process of making is personal, using thread and twine to create layers that nest within each other. These materials, tied to domestic homemaking and other crafts, create a soft underbelly to the square itself. From different angles, these individual pieces suddenly look like a mass, or maybe forms lining up. This intervention is quiet and curious to commuters. It says, "I am finally here, represented, and I look different to you depending on where you stand." This statement is the poetics in the ongoing protest for the right to vote.